Denpamen is a unique little RPG I tried on the 3DS recently that shares a lot of similarities with other games I really enjoy. You've got this cute little hub island that has everything you need on it. There's a shop where you can buy gear and items, a shrine where you can revive characters you lost in battle, and the radio tower where you can capture Denpamen using the 3DS's camera, because according to the game's story, these guys exist in radio waves. But I guess I caught all the Denpamen in my apartment already. Anyway, when you're ready to go out and explore, you select the dungeon you're working on completing from this world map. The presentation is so good. I love how simple and colorful everything is. Also, the shop is shaped like a big loaf of bread, and, well, I just think that's very special. This game was developed by Genius Sonority, I think that's how you say it, better known as the people who made the Pokemon games on the GameCube and also Pokemon Battle Revolution on the Wii. They went on to develop a total of 5 games in the Denpamen series, and unfortunately we only got the first 3 on the 3DS. The other 2 are Japan-exclusive mobile games that seem more like free-to-play microtransaction-y spin-offs, and I'm pretty sure the servers for these games have been shut down for a while, and yeah, it does kind of suck that I'll never at least get to try them, but it doesn't really seem like we missed out on that much anyway. But today I just want to focus on the first Denpamen because my enjoyment of it has led me to spend some time thinking about the type of RPG that I find really appealing and how taste in games really varies from person to person. I remember looking at reviews of this game back when it came out in 2012 as it was one of the first big 3DS eShop titles. I never picked it up though because everything I heard about it back then made the game sound kind of average, so I just wrote it off as not really being worth my time, but I've since learned my lesson. You see, having the internet available to you at all times of the day is great. It's nice being able to look up a quick review of a game and see if it's any good before spending money on it. However, no matter how objective people try to be in their reviews, there is a 100% chance that their own tastes and opinions affect their feelings towards a game. When I was younger, I really valued what reviewers had to say about games, so much so that if a game I thought looked interesting from trailers didn't get an overwhelmingly positive review, I wouldn't play it. Thankfully, as I've grown up, I've realized just how stupid that is, and I've stopped doing it. In recent years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I really miss the feeling of discovering games on my own without any kind of influence or recommendation from other people. Back in the day, playing games based on what I thought looked interesting made finding something I really liked feel even more special. Even if a game was super popular, kid me most likely didn't realize that. Like, I remember thinking that Zelda was like this hidden gem of a series that I had stumbled across, and it made me feel a really strong connection to these games because I had never heard anyone talk about them before. But these days, thanks to the internet, it feels like everything has a pedigree and a score tied to it, and sometimes I think that influences what we choose to buy or play a little too much, and stops us from trying things that we might end up really enjoying otherwise. It can create this weird self-fulfilling prophecy when you see a game's review score and start making assumptions like, oh, this person gave it a 7 out of 10, I think I'll probably find it average too. So then you go into it looking for reasons to justify its 7 out of 10 score, or you might just not even play it. Whereas if you went in blind because you thought the game looked interesting and didn't look at any reviews for it, you'd think about the game in a different way, no longer comparing it to an experience that someone else had. We do the same thing with games that receive high praise, like, oh wow, this game has a 9 out of 10, it must be really good. And then you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you pay full price for a new game that was given a high score, but then maybe it ends up not really being your cup of tea. Did you know that Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky, a game that I really love, has a Metascore of 54? That's out of 100, by the way, for people who don't know. If someone told me that back when the game came out, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But thankfully, I wasn't really on the internet back then, so I bought the game anyway and ended up loving it. Here's a less extreme example, but Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube, my favorite game ever, has a Metascore of 78, which isn't bad, it just sounds a bit average, but to me, this game isn't average at all, and if you'd asked me, I'd give it a 100. It just goes to show how much of a case-by-case basis one's enjoyment of a game can be, which directly contrasts to the purpose of review scores, which tries to be an objective rating of a game. Relating this back to Denpamen and the RPGs I like part of this video's title, I'd give this game a high score if I was asked to. The game reminds me a lot of some of my other favorite RPGs that scratch a specific itch for me. Games like the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series, or just the Mystery Dungeon series in general, and the original Dragon Quest Monsters on the Game Boy Color. All of these games kind of share a similar structure. They're dungeon crawlers where you start out with one dungeon, and once you reach the end and defeat the boss, you unlock the next set of dungeons, and once you beat those, you unlock more, and so on. For some, it may sound painfully simple or even boring, but personally, I've always enjoyed this kind of structure. It's very streamlined, but you still get the fun of an RPG, the battles, the strategy of resource management, and the sense of exploration, just without the bloat of games like, say, Octopath Traveler, for example, where each time you reach a town, you have to sit through like a 30-minute cutscene of boring dialogue where the characters just repeat themselves over and over again, and it's just really dry, and I just don't like that game. I tried twice actually to get into that game, and I just can't. The story's just really boring, and they shove it down your throat constantly. So I personally had a really hard time getting into Octopath, a game with a Metascore of 83. That's pretty positive, and you know, everyone I know who's played Octopath likes that game. And it's not that I don't like more story-driven games. Some of my favorite RPGs are the Final Fantasy games, which are all very story-driven. I just think that these games, the early Final Fantasy games and others like it, find a much better balance of story and gameplay than games like Octopath. The Final Fantasy games have this way of making me interested in the cast and story without bombarding me with dialogue constantly. It's all about balance. Because look, RPGs are known for being long, and I have a hard enough time finishing games as it is. So if I find myself getting bored and mashing through text for a story that takes itself way too seriously more often than I am fighting enemies and exploring, that's usually when I put the game down. So that's one reason why I tend to find a lot of older RPGs more appealing, because while a lot of older RPGs have stories, and good stories at that, the dialogue was often much lighter, goofier, and taking itself less seriously, and not overstaying its welcome. Honestly, there is usually just a lot less dialogue in these older RPGs than there are in a lot of modern ones, like Octopath Traveler, and that one strategy game, Project Triangle Strategy. That game, I tried to get into it, but like there's like hour-long cutscenes between the chapters, and I wanted to skip them, and then I didn't know what was going on in the story, and it was just bad. I just did not like it at all. So that's why I find games like Denpamen so fun. You just get right into the gameplay. And based on the reviews I remember watching back in the day, I thought Denpamen had like pretty much no level variety. Back in those old reviews, I felt like I only ever saw this area, which is the first dungeon. And that's because the reviewers at the time didn't use much, if any, footage of their own outside of trailers. This is still something that a lot of these new game hype YouTubers do that kind of annoys me. There's nothing wrong with using trailers for games in your videos if the game isn't out yet, but when you're talking about a game that you've supposedly played, sometimes it makes me question how much of a game these YouTubers have actually played if they don't even have their own footage of it and they're only using footage from trailers. For me at least, that raises a question of credibility and journalistic integrity, and also it just makes the reviews kind of even more boring and mundane to watch if they're not using, I could go watch the trailer if I wanted to, rather than clicking on some guy's video. But I find it hard to fully trust game reviews as they are, but if someone is reviewing a game and they don't even bother to get their own footage of it, how do I know they've really even played a substantial enough amount of it to be forming their opinion on it? Someone who doesn't use their own footage when they are reviewing games might say something like, oh, this game's bad because it's too difficult, and maybe they aren't using their own footage because it would reveal that they didn't really spend enough time with the game to even get the hang of it. Maybe they were only in the first area or something, before deciding, hey, I'm going to quickly throw a video together about this game so I can be one of the first reviews up on YouTube and get a lot of views. And that's totally a real thing that people do. So that's why I find it kind of hard to trust a lot of reviewers sometimes. So that might sound like a big tangent, but it does support what I was saying earlier about game reviews and review scores not accurately representing how you personally may feel about a game. Because people who review games most likely don't play them or even enjoy them in the exact same way that you do. And by that I mean, someone may play a game like Denpamen and say, this game sucks, it has no story, and all you do is dungeon crawl. Whereas I might say, I really like this game. It doesn't waste your time with a bunch of bloated dialogue, and it just gets right into the gameplay, and it's nice and simple. So what I'm trying to say is, don't let other people's opinions have too much of an influence on what you ultimately decide to consume, because no matter how objective or rational you think a critic is, I guarantee you they have several biases influencing the way they review something. So think for yourself, come to your own conclusions about things, and thank you for watching.